Hello, I'm Dr. Ian McCullough with Johns Hopkins. This case study involves a Department of Defense application, and it's a unique one in that it involves online information warfare, and it's a bit dated. It was one of the earliest projects I did about 12 to 15 years ago. So at that time, there was a $26 million a year program that the U.S. had to counter online extremism. And so the network that you're seeing here, each of the nodes in this network represents an online forum, and there are lines connecting them if a certain number of personas were active on both forums. Now, within the $26 million a year program, they hired native speakers that would engage with extremist personas and perhaps trap them into terms of service violations to get them banned from the platform, or in some cases counter the messaging and say, well, no, that's not really what the religion says. It says this instead, or that's not really the news story that happened. This is what really happened. And they were using truthful information to try and counter the propaganda that was online. Now, there were a number of issues with this program, but the one that I want to talk about is how we assess the effectiveness of it. And the way that was being done manually is a certain percentage of the labor, which I estimate being about $4 million in labor costs, but these of the native speakers, were spent looking at forums and making an assessment. Essentially, is this forum pro-Al-Qaeda or pro-America? Or is it neutral, or is it mixed? And so it was given a red dot if it was pro-Al-Qaeda messaging. It was given a green dot if it was pro-US. Yellow is unassessed. And black would represent neutral or mixed. So there's not many of that here. Now, when I looked at this first representation, I noticed that there's a lot of yellow. There is a lot of unassessed stuff out there in the forum, but there is a fair amount of actual assessments that people have done. And so I thought, I can build a machine learning classifier to assess the rest of the terrain. And the reason for that is if you look at that cluster in kind of the upper right middle, you'll see that there's maybe 2 red dots and a lot of yellow. We don't really know what's going on in that. But if you look at the cluster that's kind of the large cluster right below it, you'll see that there is a lot of green. And so I would argue that we might not be assessing this with accuracy or with a general sample, right? Because if we are clustering all of our assessments into one set of forums that are kind of ideologically similar, and we're completely omitting another one, are we really getting an accurate assessment, right? Is this a real honest assessment of how well the program is going? So I built my first classifier. The idea here is to measure the extremist forums and to try and reduce that $4 million in labor cost to assess. And the classifier that was best performing for me was a hybrid naive Bayes support vector machine, which achieved 64% accuracy. Now, when I did this, the leadership was like, well, Ian, that's a horrible classifier. That's like flipping a coin. And my attitude is it's double digit better than flipping a coin, thank you very much. But how often do the people agree on the assessment of the forums? And nobody knew the answer, and nobody wanted to find out. You see, one of the other impacts of having not enough of the media space assessed is they weren't hitting their quota of 20% of online forums being manually assessed. So everybody's assessing a different forum. The worst thing that they thought they could do is actually have multiple resources assessing the same forums, because if you think about it, if every forum gets assessed by 2 people instead of by 1, you're getting half the forums assessed. And so for this reason, they wanted to try and push to get more assessment done, not the overlap. So nobody knew. So it actually took some conversations with some congressional staffers during the visit where Congress had to require the military to pause their engagement and actually do that interannotator agreement study. And when they did, they found that human agreement was only 68%. So what does that mean? That means we were spending $4 million for a 4% marginal improvement in accuracy while not even understanding that 32% of the assessments people couldn't agree on. And it seems like it would be simple to judge whether a website forum is pro-America or pro-Al-Qaeda, But what if somebody is saying something negative about the president of the United States? What if that president is Obama versus Donald Trump versus President Biden? How do we judge that? And I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong answer, but we need to have a standard, and we need to be consistent about that standard in order to have higher performing accuracy in the classifier. So this solution wasn't actually adopted. They didn't move forward with it. They continued to run the program as is. Some assessments have criticized that this program as actually contributing to the growth of the digital caliphate, and I think that had more to do with a lack of understanding about social judgment theory and about the science of persuasion. It probably had something to do with the lack of proper assessment and at scale assessment that was being done. But I think that even though this was not a successful implementation of AI, I think it still brings up some very important lessons about how we assess and how we improve the performance of some of those classifiers. And for me, what it did is it actually spurred me to learn more about this, and many of the other case studies that you have seen, or other cases that we look at in the course, have actually been inspired by this. So it has done some good. I just wish it had been properly implemented at the time. I'm Dr. Ian McCullough. Thank you for tuning into this case study.